Once upon a time, there was a man I was engaged to, someone I thought I'd spend my life with. But fate had other plans, all thanks to my sister. In those dark days, I was devastated. Now, though, I found new joy, and I'm eager to share it with my sister and my ex-fiancé. My name is Catherine. I'm not stunningly beautiful, just an ordinary office worker. But once upon a time, there was a man named Bob who had promised to marry me. Bob was the handsome type with a career in a prestigious firm, the kind of guy people called a catch. We were blissfully happy in a way that made me believe it would never end. But then life's cruelty intervened. I never did marry Bob, all because of my sister. My sister's name is Sophie, and she has always had a keen interest in fashion, which she maintains to this day. Unlike me, Sophie has always been meticulous about her appearance and has always been naturally beautiful. As a result, she attracted attention from boys since middle school and even had a stint as an amateur model for a fashion magazine. Sophie harbored dreams of becoming a professional model. Meanwhile, after graduating from college and settling into a routine job at a regular company, I found myself invited to dinner by a business associate named Bob. Over time, we got to know each other better through these dinners, and unexpectedly, something began to develop between us. That evening, Bob invited me out to dinner after work. I accepted without hesitation, enjoying his company. On our way back, Bob surprised me by confessing his feelings. Though taken aback, I realized I had feelings for him too, and so began our relationship. A year later, Bob proposed, and I happily accepted. Shortly after our engagement, Bob and I visited my parents to share the news. They were delighted, and discussions about wedding plans filled our home with joy. However, not everyone shared in our happiness. That person was my younger sister, Sophie. Sophie was shocked to hear about my engagement, and even more so when she met Bob. Always popular and admired for her looks, Sophie had a history of dismissing my more reserved romantic life. "I don't want my embarrassing sister to ruin my reputation," she would often say. Seeing me, whom she considered less socially adept, marry a successful man from a prestigious company before her seemed to bruise her pride deeply. Yet I remained unaware of Sophie's true feelings, oblivious to her subtle disdain. Looking back, I should have noticed her demeanor then. One day, Sophie casually asked, "Since you're going to be my brother-in-law, can we exchange contact information?" Bob and I saw no reason to refuse, so we exchanged numbers without hesitation. As I neared the end of my job tenure, there were many late nights spent wrapping up projects. Then, on a day when my parents were away, Sophie put her plan into motion, a plan she likely devised long before. Knowing I would soon leave our family home to live with Bob, Sophie seized her opportunity. She called Bob, fabricating the story. "Bob, my sister suddenly came home sick. Our parents are out of town, and I'm feeling uneasy being alone. Could you come over?" Deceived by her ruse, Bob, who was just finishing work, rushed to our house without suspecting anything amiss. I rushed over because I heard Catherine was ill. "Where is she?" Bob's concern was palpable, and naturally, he assumed I was home. But Sophie quickly admitted, "I'm sorry, Bob. I lied to you. My sister isn't sick, she's still at work." Instead of anger, Bob responded with a puzzled expression. "Why would you lie about that?" Sophie, visibly nervous, began to explain. Meanwhile, after finishing my workday, I arrived home to an unexpected sight. Bob was there. Despite the surprise, I greeted him cheerfully. "Oh, you're here. What's up?" Little did I know, this moment would soon bring the deepest despair and sadness I had ever known. "Catherine, I'm sorry. I think we should break up." Bob's words hit me like a sudden storm. Unable to grasp their meaning at first, I stammered, "What? Are you serious? Break up? What's going on?" As I pressed for answers, Sophie entered the room, casting an uneasy atmosphere over us all. "Catherine, the truth is, I've been seeing Sophie. I'm sorry, but I've fallen in love with her more than I realized." Bob's words left me stunned and confused. Still reeling from the shock, Sophie added, "I'm sorry, Catherine, but Bob has decided to marry me." I felt utterly lost and devastated. Then Sophie, with an awkward attempt at comfort, said, "You might not want to attend our wedding ceremony, but please come to the reception, won't you?" Tears were all I could manage. Sophie had stolen my fiancé away from me. I felt abandoned, and the pain was overwhelming. My parents were deeply concerned, watching helplessly as I withdrew into my room. Having already quit my job, I felt utterly powerless. Messages from my former coworkers asking about the wedding plans only intensified my sorrow. I could only reply, explaining it would be a simple family affair. Months later, I found myself in a new and unfamiliar place, determined to begin anew and find true happiness. After the painful breakup with Bob, I had withdrawn for a time, but a newfound determination welled up inside me. Why should I continue to suffer? It was time to move on. Things progressed swiftly from there. I spoke with my parents, deciding to leave home and start afresh in a completely different environment. The new place was serene, surrounded by lush greenery. My parents supported my decision wholeheartedly, assisting me greatly with the relocation. Shortly after settling in, while taking a moment to relax, my mom approached me with surprising news. "You were in your room. Bob visited. He explained everything that happened between you two and apologized." I couldn't fathom why my parents were apologizing. What Bob had done was beyond forgiveness. Yet there they were, even kneeling in remorse. "We've also heard about Sophie. We understand you can't forgive her, Catherine, but she's our daughter too," my parents explained, visibly torn. My parents were deeply troubled by Sophie's actions, knowing the pain she had caused me. Despite their disapproval, Sophie seemed to have made her choice and went to Bob. From then on, Bob began a daily ritual of coming to our house, pleading for forgiveness and seeking approval for his marriage to Sophie. Faced with Bob's persistence, my parents eventually felt compelled to relent. That's why they apologized to me for accepting his union with Sophie. "I honestly don't dwell on it anymore, but I understand how you feel," I replied with a bittersweet smile, holding back the tears. My mom was visibly emotional, while my dad wore a pained expression of apology. Despite everything, I reassured him, "When I have children, I'll lean on you both a lot." Their faces softened into smiles at my words. Mom, still teary-eyed, added, "Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything." As I settled into my new life and found some peace of mind, I began working at a cozy little restaurant. The team was small, but the atmosphere was bright and welcoming, which I appreciated greatly. The banter among the staff, especially the teasing directed at the manager Steve, added to the warmth of the place. A few months into my job, a pivotal event unfolded that would shape my future. It happened one evening as Steve offered me a ride home after work and confessed his feelings for me. I was taken aback and uncertain. Steve was genuinely a good guy, kind-hearted with both charm and a friendly demeanor that appealed to many. Yet I couldn't shake off the past hurt that still lingered within me. I feared the possibility of facing abandonment once again. Steve seemed to sense my hesitation and assured me there was no rush for an answer before heading home for the day. Despite the initial awkwardness, the familiar camaraderie with the part-time staff and Steve's kindness helped ease my worries. Deep down, I felt my heart had already made a decision. During a break, I discovered something about Steve's past. It turned out he had been betrayed by someone he had been dating and had a rough experience at his previous workplace before joining the restaurant. We shared a similar pain of betrayal by those we trusted. That day, I chose to accompany Steve home to listen to this story. Along the way, he opened up about his past. He had previously managed a store, but due to certain events, the store lost credibility and eventually closed down. Steve bore the brunt of the blame and lost his job as a result. After hearing Steve's story, I felt compelled to share my own reasons for being at the restaurant. When I finished, Steve looked at me kindly and said, "You've been incredibly strong." His words meant the world to me, acknowledging my resilience despite the pain I'd endured. It was exactly what I needed to hear. I did my best. Despite being betrayed by someone I loved, I managed to pick myself up, I confess, acknowledging the difficulty of my journey, to which I added sincerely, "You've done amazingly well too." Steve's smile grew wider, and in that moment, I found the courage to respond to his earlier confession. "Since that day, I might be a handful, but I hope you'll be patient with me," I told him. From then on, the teasing from the part-timers at the restaurant increased, but it was all in good spirit. "Congratulations. Wishing you both a lifetime of happiness." They cheered, genuinely happy for us. "That's a bit premature. There's a right time for that line, and it'll come around again. When it does, you'd better let me say it," Steve teased, a bit flustered as I laughed along with everyone else. It was a moment of pure joy, a typical day in our lives, until things took a turn. For the second time in my life, I was proposed to. Without hesitation, I accepted, determined to find lasting happiness this time. I believed Steve was the one who could truly make me happy. I visited my parents' house for the first time in a while to share the news, and they were overjoyed. Opening up about Steve, I felt their support as they said, "Please make our daughter happy. We trust you." "I will make Catherine happy," he asserted confidently. After chatting for a while, my dad hesitated before sharing, "Sophie and Bob are going to get married." He mentioned that an invitation might arrive, but insisted I needn't worry about it. Truthfully, I wasn't bothered. I was too wrapped up in my own happiness. In fact, I wanted to celebrate it openly. When I expressed this to my parents, they responded warmly, "If Catherine feels that way, then we trust your judgment." Sure enough, a few days later, an invitation to Sophie's wedding arrived. I decided we would attend together. Dave and I had opted for a simple legal marriage due to Sophie's impending wedding. We felt it would be less overwhelming for our parents and relatives to stagger our celebrations. We promised ourselves a proper wedding ceremony once things had settled down. On the date of Sophie's wedding, Steve and I arrived together at the venue. It had been a while since we had seen Sophie and Bob. Bob appeared weary, and there was a tension in the air as we exchanged greetings and introductions with family. When I proudly introduced Steve as my husband, Sophie's reaction was visibly surprised, etching the moment into memory. During the event, I found myself wanting to ask Bob about what had transpired between him and Sophie on the day when neither my parents nor I were present. Bob initially hesitated but eventually began to confide in me. According to him, when Sophie called him that day and informed him falsely that I was suddenly ill, Bob decided to wait for me. Sophie then arrived with strong drinks, coaxing him to indulge. Despite not being a heavy drinker, Bob had a few too many and became intoxicated. In his vulnerable state, Sophie took advantage of the situation, seducing him. Bob admitted that Sophie's beauty and allure played a role in clouding his judgment. Despite our engagement, he succumbed to temptation, and from then on, his attention began to drift towards Sophie. After hearing Bob's confession, his repeated apologies seemed insignificant to me. Honestly, I felt indifferent. What mattered most was finally knowing the truth. Meanwhile, Steve and Sophie were engaged in a conversation nearby. I was curious about their discussion but decided to inquire later, considering Sophie's upcoming wedding. On our way home, I couldn't resist asking Steve, "Were you upset when you were talking to Sophie?" Steve sighed. "As I mentioned before, she's my ex who betrayed me. But that's not all. She's also the reason I lost my job." I was taken aback. It felt like such a small world, and learning that Sophie was directly responsible for the closure of Steve's shop added another layer of shock. I dove deeper into the situation. It turned out that a few months into Sophie's relationship with Steve, she had an affair with a designer. Sophie believed dating someone in the modeling industry would be more advantageous, despite already being with Steve. When Steve discovered this by chance, he understandably confronted Sophie. However, instead of remorse, Sophie became angry and the relationship ended abruptly. Sophie's anger didn't dissipate. She went further, fabricating a fake photo of foreign objects and dishes from Steve's restaurant and shared it on social media. Given her modeling career, she had a substantial following, and the photos quickly went viral. The negative publicity reached Steve's boss, who had entrusted the business to him amid declining profits. The resulting closure of the restaurant led to Steve losing his job, with him unfairly shouldering the blame. Steve harbored deep resentment over the incident. Not knowing the true culprit behind the fabricated photo, he was left without a target for his anger. Amidst the turmoil, Steve finally discovered the truth during a casual drink with a friend. His girlfriend's friend had seen Sophie boasting on social media about causing the closure of a restaurant. Unaware that the restaurant belonged to Steve, the friend relayed this information to Steve. Though Steve now knew who was responsible, it was too late to take any action, so he resolved to make a fresh start elsewhere. It was then that Steve and I crossed paths. I approached Steve with an apology. "I'm sorry for what my sister did. I'm the sister of the person who caused so much trouble in your life. I didn't know how to face you. I was afraid you might hate me." Steve's response was unexpectedly kind. "It's all in the past, Catherine. None of this was your fault." His words brought me immense relief, reaffirming our decision to pursue happiness together once more. Later, Sophie faced consequences for her actions. She had arranged a photo shoot at an unexpected location, our home, known for its lush greenery and picturesque backdrop, ideal for modeling. This shoot was evidently part of her ambition to pursue a modeling career. The incident took place during dinner at a restaurant she had visited, which happened to be Steve's. Since I no longer worked at Steve's restaurant, I heard about this incident afterward. Upon recognizing Sophie at the entrance, Steve promptly intervened, stating firmly, I'm sorry, but I can't allow you to enter. He refused Sophie and her group access, prompting the staff to inquire about the situation. Steve proceeded to disclose Sophie's past actions and the hardships he had endured because of her. She has a criminal record, and I have evidence to support it. I can't risk a repeat of past troubles, so I must refuse her entry. There was stunned silence among the staff, and Sophie visibly paled at Steve's words. Moreover, Steve declared his intention to inform the president of the company where Sophie was poised to start about her troubled history. The individual who had scouted Sophie was taken aback and urged Steve to reconsider, but Steve remained resolute in his decision. As a result, Sophie's scheduled photoshoot was canceled, and news of the incident spread throughout the industry, shattering her aspirations of becoming a model. No one wanted to associate with someone who had caused such a significant scandal in the past. Adding to this, I learned from my mom that Bob's company had been experiencing declining performance lately, and he was now under consideration for demotion. She appeared concerned about what the future held for both of them. Despite the tumultuous events, Steve and I continued to enjoy our days together happily. Today marks the eve of our long-awaited wedding. We've both overcome challenges in the past, but now we're filled with joy. There's also a new life growing within me. Congratulations. Wishing you a lifetime of happiness. The staff from the restaurant where we first met cheerfully repeat this familiar phrase. Thank you, I respond gratefully, stating before everyone, I pledge to cherish our family always and to seek happiness forevermore. "7 years ago, I got married to my husband. His sister already had kids back then. But right from the start, I felt like I wasn't really part of their family. My sister-in-law made it clear that I wasn't their aunt. She even told her kids that I wasn't their aunt. Because of this, I don't feel close to them like I do with my husband's other siblings' kids, who I treat like my own nieces and nephews. I love spending time with them and being a fun aunt. I've done things like painting their rooms and taking them on trips because I like being creative and making them happy. Even though I'm a mom now, I still love doing these things for my nieces and nephews because they're like my family, and I never really had one before. But when it comes to my sister-in-law's kids, I don't do any of that anymore. I've stopped trying to talk to them because my sister-in-law made it clear that she doesn't want me involved. I don't want to cause any drama or trouble by interacting with them since it seems like she doesn't want us to connect. Now, our kids feel jealous and left out because their cousins have cool stuff in their rooms and get to do fun things, while they don't. When my sister-in-law confronted me about it, she blamed me for making her kids feel that way. I told her it was her fault for creating a situation where I couldn't relate to her kids, and now they're the ones suffering because of it. I reminded her that she's reaping what she sowed, and her kids are the ones paying the price for it. Now she's all fired up, saying this and that. It's clear she's not happy, and honestly, I never wanted my kids to see her as their aunt anyway. The rest of the family just shakes their heads at her antics, but I know this tension isn't helping anyone. I do feel bad for her kids though. I can't help but wonder if I've made things worse. She doesn't see me as family to her kids because we're not related by blood or adoption. I don't think I'm in the wrong here, and it's frustrating to see the family dismiss her behavior. If anyone confronted me about it, I'd explain that I've always respected her role as a parent, even when she asked me to step back from being an aunt years ago. It hurt, but I understood and never crossed any boundaries. It's unfortunate that things turned out this way, but I had to respect her wishes. I didn't set these boundaries, I just followed them. When she complained to OP could have responded, "Do I know you?" But I wonder if the sister-in-law was the only daughter among the siblings. Maybe OP being the first woman to marry into the family triggered her. Over time, as the other brothers got married and had kids, she became less aggressive, but the damage was done. The only reason the sister-in-law regrets it now is because OP turned out to be a fantastic aunt to other children, and the sister-in-law's plan backfired. Actions have consequences. You followed her instructions not to get involved. It seems like the rest of the family knows she's difficult too. Everyone here seems to have their faults. You probably aren't telling the whole story about what's going on between you and your sister-in-law. But it's not fair for either of you to involve the kids. And what about your husband? Does he also ignore his niece and nephew? Why is he supporting either of you acting this way? I couldn't disagree more. The sister-in-law made the choice to exclude OP and is now causing conflict because OP respected the boundaries she set around her kids. Are you suggesting OP should have ignored that boundary? I understand your concern for her kids. Sadly, they suffer because of their mom's actions. But before you try to change anything, consider how your sister-in-law will react. She might turn any contact into something negative. Keep that in mind as you decide what to do next. This situation happened 2 months ago, but he's still upset about it. I'm a 45-year-old woman. I love my oldest son, but he's almost an adult and acts like one. In our family, everyone takes turns doing chores like cooking, washing dishes, and cleaning common areas on different days. Unfortunately, my son dislikes chores and always tries to avoid them. It's been an ongoing struggle. Washing dishes is particularly troublesome. He fills the dishwasher too much, preventing the detergent from reaching the dishes, leading to them not getting clean. I interrupted him quickly and reminded him that the dishwasher sanitizes dishes. My husband supported me, saying, if he wants dinner, he'll eat from his dishes. He often promised to wash some, but I refused, reminding him that he had the chance to clean them properly the night before. I told him to eat from them as they were or skip dinner. He yelled and threatened to make his own food, but I stood firm. Eventually he gave in, reluctantly selecting the least dirty dishes and eating quietly. I felt bad seeing him so disgusted, but I was tired of the wasted time, water, and detergent. It turned out well. His dishes came out perfectly clean afterward. However, he's still angry, and I do feel guilty now. But I'm tired of his deliberate laziness causing problems for everyone else in the house. Am I wrong? You're not wrong, and I think you handled the situation well. However, I disagree with your statement that he doesn't realize his laziness screws over everyone else in the house. He knows, he just doesn't care. He's old enough to understand the consequences of his actions, and it's time he learns. This should have been addressed sooner. If he doesn't face consequences, he won't change his behavior. Instead, he learned that even when I make a mistake, my parents will have to fix it because they need to eat too. What OP did was smart because he's almost an adult, and it's time to learn how to do things properly. The fact that he suddenly knew how to do the dishes correctly overnight shows that he was capable all along but chose not to do them properly. Well done, OP. I grew up in poverty but worked harder than anyone else to achieve success in my personal, financial, and professional life. My family often had to choose between bus fare and a meal. So when I became financially successful, many people approached me for help. I helped them out of compassion and understanding, knowing how much a small gesture can mean to someone in need. However, many of those I helped started to see me as their personal ATM. I never faced this issue with people who were already financially stable. They would have been embarrassed to ask. While I don't spoil my kids, we do live comfortably in a nice house in a good neighborhood, and I expect them to work hard and excel in school. My eldest son, a teenager, got into trouble for telling a peer that he didn't want to be friends because of his financial situation. A teacher overheard and reacted strongly. Unlike that teacher, I took the time to understand the context and facts before responding. My son then began spending time with Austin. Austin would often lament about not having money to participate in activities, so my son would sometimes cover for him. Like when they went to see Top Gun and Austin couldn't afford a ticket, my son paid for him. However, things got uncomfortable when Austin began to expect my son to foot the bill regularly. The tipping point came when they went to IHIL with friends, and Austin assumed my son would pay for his meal too. While my son only ordered onion rings, Austin indulged in a full meal, dessert, and milkshake. Later, my son vented to their friends about how little money he receives from me, and yet he still has to work as a tutor, only for Austin to take advantage of his generosity. Consequently, their friends distanced themselves from Austin. A few weeks later, in class, Austin wondered why he wasn't being invited to hang out anymore. My son replied, because he's tired of covering for him. Austin responded, but I'm poor. My son sarcastically remarked, oh, so you're too poor to be friends with? Maybe I should quit school and get a job like him. This exchange prompted a call from the teacher. I clarified the context of the conversation to the teacher, as she wasn't receptive when my son tried to explain it. She labeled my son as mean and threatened detention. I informed her that I would advise my son not to serve detention for this incident and asked her what she planned to do about it. She ultimately dropped the matter. Edit. It's important to note that Austin isn't in extreme poverty. He has access to resources like last year's iPhone. He has the ability to work like other kids at their school, but chooses not to. You're not in the wrong here. Consider discussing with the head teacher the emotional toll on your son, who has been coerced into giving money repeatedly, and how the last incident bordered on theft. Your son deserves support in standing up to emotional manipulation and bullying, and he has the right to end the friendship. The teacher should have heard the whole story before jumping to conclusions. Everyone involved made mistakes here. While your son's outburst might warrant detention, it's not ideal for you to interfere with a teacher's disciplinary actions unless there's a significant issue with her approach. It might be beneficial to help your son improve how he expresses himself to avoid more serious consequences in the future. I agree, your son has the right to stand up for himself. But the way he expressed it could have been kinder. A more effective approach would have been to say something like, "I don't want to be friends with someone who takes advantage of me," which addresses the real issue without targeting Austin's financial situation. Being overly confrontational with someone who feels entitled might lead to further trouble. Given the circumstances, your son's response wasn't entirely unreasonable. It was a sarcastic retort to someone making excuses for their behavior. The teacher's refusal to listen to the full story and her decision to focus on a poorly worded phrase taken out of context didn't help the situation. I know it might sound odd, but I don't think I'm in the wrong here. I just need some other perspectives on this. My brother, who dropped out of high school, recently got married to his wife, who has similar qualifications, at the young age of 19. I'm 23, just to give some context. The situation is complicated, but basically my brother's mother-in-law pushed them into getting married because she wanted a grandchild as soon as possible. Unfortunately, my own mother went along with it, which I find frustrating. Now my new sister-in-law is expecting, which confirms my suspicions. I know I might seem disrespectful, but I'm not happy about it. We're not well off financially. My dad, who used to be assertive, didn't step in to prevent this situation. Ironically, he persuaded me against attending the college I wanted because of the high tuition fees. To cover the wedding costs, my dad borrowed money from my uncle, his brother, and now he's pressuring me to repay it because my brother and sister-in-law, being young and expecting, can't afford to. They told me they're in too much debt to get a loan from a bank, so it falls on me since I'm debt-free with savings and a job. When they brought this up, I didn't say anything. I just laughed and left. Now they're bombarding me with calls and texts asking for financial help, but I refuse to budge. It feels like we're living in completely different realities. It's not about culture or anything like that. Am I wrong for refusing to take out a loan for my family? Definitely not. Goodness, what a chaotic situation. If no one can afford to cover the wedding costs, what about the baby? It seems like they'll keep turning to you for loans they won't repay. Stand your ground. This isn't your problem to fix, so don't entertain further discussions about it. If they can't afford a lavish wedding without a substantial loan, maybe they should prioritize their resources for the baby instead. Laughing in their faces was a fitting response to such a ridiculous request. But please ensure that you're the only one with access to your savings. Secure your accounts with updated passwords and avoid staying logged into online banking on shared devices. It's important to take these precautions, especially if your parents have access to personal information like your social security number and employment history. While you might believe they wouldn't take advantage of you, financial strain can drive people to make unexpected decisions. That's right. If they have your social security number, they could potentially open credit in your name, leaving you in a difficult situation. It's a quick process, but you can easily lock your credit by contacting the major reporting agencies, usually 3 of them, either by phone or online. Reversing the lock is simple when you're ready to apply for loans for things like a home, education, or a car. Their financial irresponsibility shouldn't fall on your shoulders. They need to figure out a repayment plan for your uncle on their own. Growing up, I lived with my best friend and his wife, Amanda, on I-35. While Amanda has always been a friend, I've had a closer relationship with her husband. Unfortunately, they moved out of town years ago, only returning for significant family events like funerals or weddings. A few months back, Amanda visited for her sister-in-law's bachelorette party, despite feeling uneasy about it due to her sister-in-law's mistreatment stemming from jealousy or other issues. Wanting to ease her nerves, I offered to pick her up from the airport and take her out for drinks afterward. However, I made a mistake and forgot to add it to my calendar. I had already planned a date for that night and couldn't cancel it, so I arranged for the sister-in-law's best friend to pick up Amanda and take her to the hotel. 2 days later, I met up with Amanda for drinks. She was feeling really down after her mistreatment at the bachelorette party, where everyone else seemed to ignore her. We spent a few hours chatting and drinking, and then I received a text from my girlfriend, asking me to come over to her apartment. I arranged for a mutual friend to join Amanda at the bar and keep her company before leaving. After that night, Amanda stopped communicating with me. She ignored my texts and social media messages for 3 months. Finally, I decided to ask my best friend about what was going on with his wife. He listed a series of complaints Amanda had against me, including forgetting her birthday multiple times despite Facebook reminders, which she doesn't use, and the incident at the bar where I forgot to pick her up from the airport and left her alone. I explained to my friend that I tend to be absent-minded, and they should have been aware of that by now. I also mentioned that Amanda is overly sensitive and holds onto grudges. I reminded him that I had already apologized to her for everything, so I didn't understand why she was still upset. However, my best friend became angry and is now not speaking to me either. Do you think